Sarah, Skye, thank you so much for joining me today. Obviously, I don't think either of you need much of an introduction, but you're both professional long-distance Ironman triathletes. You're fresh off the back of both finishing in the top 10 at the Ironman World Championship in Kona. So today we're going to take a bit of a dive into the world of women's triathlon, how things are changing, what can be done better, and really just exploring that question of how is triathlon actually doing on the equality front. I think before we get into that wider discussion, reflecting on Kona is a great place to start because it was the first year that we had a women-only Kona. And a lot of the questions in the build-up were around what the atmosphere and the support was going to be like, if the dynamic or the level of hype would be different. So it would be great to get your reflections on how Kona this year compared to previous years' races, both in terms of the build-up and actually the race day itself.
I'll go. Last year was my first Kona, so I think Sarah's been a few more times than I have. So I don't have as much experience to compare to. And last year, the women had their own day still, which was really cool. But I definitely did notice a difference between the two experiences. And I think leading into the race, I was in a different environment completely. Like last year I stayed in Kona. This year I stayed out in Waikoloa. It was a little more chill. So I think for me, the buildup was a little more relaxed, a little less crazy feeling because I wasn't, seeing the Kona. I wasn't in Palani or whatever, like leading into the race. And then the sense that I got from other people on the island is just that everything felt a little bit more relaxed and everyone was really friendly and chill, just like happy to be there, maybe a little less intense. And then in terms of the buildup, I think social media wise, it felt pretty similar. And if nothing else, like it was only focused on the women. So it felt like there was more focus in general on the women because we were the only ones to talk about.
And Sarah, how about you? How was your experience this year compared to maybe, obviously last year was kind of different again, right? But that sort of 2019 and before that, how was it compared to that?
Well, definitely you felt the absence of men on the Big Island who were racing. The men who were there were industry folks or, supportive partners, friends. They weren't the racers. And you'd feel the difference on the Queen K. There are no men, sitting on your wheel in the lead up before the race. It was a lot of friendly waves and smiles. Just that sense of kind of that nervous energy that I won't say it's male competitiveness, but there definitely was a very distinct feeling where it was a lot more about collaboration and, celebrating triathlon than it was necessarily that competitive spirit. Not to say that people weren't interested in performing and having good races, but it was definitely a feeling of, it was a warm sense amongst the athletes. The downside, I would say, is that now I'd be interested in seeing the numbers, but the expo seemed very, very small compared to past years where you enter downtown Ali'i, you get near where the expo is going to be, and there's tons of traffic, tons of people. It's the Kona Circus. And we just were missing that Kona Circus this year, which I personally kind of enjoyed, but it also it takes away. So I would be interested to see what sort of industry disinvestment there's been. Because I feel like there was significantly less industry presence. Media-wise, I think the numbers speak pretty well of that. The women put on a great race. It was well covered. It was well received by the public. But yeah, I think the striking difference for me was the lack of industry there.
Even speaking from my own sponsors, like last year, I think I interacted, or 3 of my sponsors were there in supporting roles and in the expo. And I don't think I only had one sponsor really there who was there supporting me this year. So it was a very different, different, like you're saying, the sponsor and expo side was definitely cool.
Yeah, and do you think that's kind of a product of having the split World Championships? Do you
Mm.
think brands were having to choose between Nice or Kona and therefore couldn't do both?
Yeah, and I don't even know that it was like choosing one or the other. It was maybe even just like, well, we're not doing either because neither of them really make sense, you know? I'm not sure, I'm not exactly sure what my specific sponsors did, but I know, yeah, choices had to be made. So
Yeah, so I think you probably saw a lot of companies deciding to cancel their plans because it's incredibly expensive to be part of the Ironman Expo. It's incredibly expensive to travel to Kona, so they probably were looking at. And as we know, that the industry as a whole, there's a lot less money in marketing in these endemic sponsors. So I think probably it's a confluence of a few different factors leading to people deciding that we're just not going to put the money into going to Nice or Kona. We're going to see, we're just going to step back and see. My guess is a lot of brands said, we're going to see what kind of media attention there's going to be for this races. We want to feel it out before we go into 2024 and make decisions how much of our budget we spend at either race.
Like you say, I think a lot of people were almost interested to see how does this go down with the split championship? How is the coverage? And obviously it was all kind of pitched as being all about providing better coverage, providing fairer racing, providing more of a spotlight for the women's side of the sport. As athletes, do you feel that Kona achieved that?
I do think so. It's funny because leading into the race, I was really disappointed that the men weren't going to be there because I think the men just there's just bigger profiles on the men's side, like just matter of fact, that's how it is. And even if we stacked up like Instagram followers, male triathletes versus female, like the men just have more big personalities and more rivalries. And part of that is just because they can speak their minds and say what they want and they don't get told that they're being cocky and all that stuff. They can create their own hype. But so I was a little bit sad, like, oh, we're not going to get as much attention because the men aren't going to be there to help draw the eyes to the sport. But then once I got to the island and just felt that, yeah, this is still a world championship and everything is still being put into it from a event standpoint. Like Ironman still put everything into it that it did last year with the men there too. It made me feel really special, actually. I was like, wow, this is all for us. Like the women, we deserve this. And it's super cool that they're investing just the same amount in the media. Ironman, right? Like they're still doing the same. I mean, the press conference had more women because the men weren't there. All the same pre-Ironman media commitments, it all felt the same to me compared to last year from that perspective. And so I think it was great because, like I said earlier, we just ended up getting all of the attention. And then I know you've probably seen the numbers, like based on the YouTube viewings or the live stream viewings, we actually had more viewings than the men did in Nice. And not that it's a competition, but it just shows like people are watching. And we don't need the men at the event to have them want to watch. I mean, maybe it wouldn't hurt, but it may have helped that it was just us.
Absolutely. And Sarah, what about you? How was your experience?
Yeah, I think I was concerned that the coverage might be not as serious as the men's racing. That there would be too much leaning on, the softer side of sport, and that it wouldn't be taken with the same amount of respect as the men get. But that wasn't the case at all. At no point did I feel as though they were pandering, and it felt very equitable in terms of coverage and the attention they gave us. So I was really pleased by that. I was also really pleased that they highlighted women in the sport and put them in speaking roles. So very aware that we're going to highlight our female announcers. We're going to highlight these notable women who've historically come before us. That normally those are not the women. Those are not the people who get to speak. And giving these women who are in the profession, being able to highlight them, I think was really important. Not just highlighting the athletes, because it would have been worrisome to me if you had the women racing, but everybody on camera, everybody who was highlighted, it was just completely male dominated. Because we do need change in the industry, and that isn't just parity in the racing. It has to happen at all levels of sport. And being able to take a step back and say, it's not right for us to only have male voices speaking for these athletes. We're going to highlight the women who are in the sport. I think that was incredibly important.
I noticed that as well. And I think when I really noticed it, Sarah, was at the awards banquet when they had the women doing all the announcing at the awards banquet. And I thought to myself, okay, this is really cool that they're having these women do this. But it's also, it made me for a second sad, because I'm like, why did it take a women's only championship for us to finally be like, oh, hey, it almost, in a way, it's almost a bit like degrading that they're like, oh, here's women, let's have women do it for the women, like we need the women to have women to make everyone feel comfortable or something, which I know that's not the case, but I'm glad that it took the women's championship for them to maybe realize like, hey, let's have women do the announcing. But I hope to see that moving forward. And you know what? Let's have women announce the men's races and men announce women's, like, you know what I mean? Just more, women don't need to just stick to women. And it's just funny how that works. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but we just need more women across the board, and hopefully we're seeing that.
It's a question of whether this was just optics or this is them committing to meaningful change. And the optimist in me says, okay, there are these incredible women who are working with Ironman. Let's continue to use them and put them in the spotlight.
And like have them in the spotlight for the men's races too. Like we don't just need Rinny when it's us, like she can speak to the men's race or the women who were announcing at the awards banquet. That was extremely obvious to me, because when everything's always male dominated, you notice when there's a woman on the stage instead of a man calling your name. Like it's very noticeable.
100%. And I think that kind of feeds into what we can learn from this first year of it really being doubled down on being a women's only event. And hopefully, like you say, it did kind of feel a little bit like it was a case of it's a women's race, so we need to find women. But hopefully that will then be taken forward and we will see more women throughout the entire sport. Because I thought, for it to be the first year that Joanne Murphy took over from Mike Riley for calling people across the line, like what a great year for that to happen. But I do hope that we see that continuing forward and we seize the opportunity, because there are so many women associated with the sport, photographers, announcers, like you say, media people behind the scenes. And I think there's definitely an opportunity there. So that's really interesting. Sort of taking it a little bit wider from Kona then, Skye, you sort of raised a point that I did want to speak to you about in terms of the narratives and the hype and the storytelling in the sport, because I think we might kind of like to think that it's super equal, but I think, like you say, there is some sort of discrepancy almost in terms of the loudest voices. So Skye, I think it was a couple of months ago, you were talking about in an interview that you did about the fact that there isn't as much hype for women in sport, and that you raised a point sort of going into the US Open, I think it was, that there was kind of a video done about Christian Blumenfeld and Chelsea Sodaro. And people were sort of saying like, oh, Christian's super confident and they loved it. But then for Chelsea, it was almost like a negative thing that she was confident.
It was.
She deserved to be confident, and it was perceived as cockiness. I'd be interested to hear from both of you. Do you think there is this different expectation for women in sport in terms of how you put yourselves out there and how you talk about ambition and things like that?
Well, I don't think it's limited to sport. I think it's every facet. I mean, I used to work in corporate America, and if you're an opinionated, outspoken woman, then you're just an outspoken, don't want to deal with her woman. If you're an opinionated, outspoken man, you're a leader. So it's not just sport. And it's getting better, right? But it's like, if you don't fit the traditional soft-spoken, submissive female role, then, she's tough to deal with, or she's cocky. And you said just now, Chelsea deserved to be confident. Why do you even have to deserve to be confident? Can't you just be confident? And maybe you fail and maybe you don't live up to what you talked and what you said, but do you know how many men probably say they're going to do something and it doesn't work out that way, and no one's bashing on them? I mean, I'm sure they do get called out for it, but there's definitely a double standard in the way that men and women can represent themselves in sport and have it perceived. And that makes it really hard. I think for women to build the hype for ourselves and be able to build those exciting narratives, it's like we have to stick to the soft, inspirational, like, I mean, like being a mom, that's a great inspirational story that people love, but like, do we just have to go the mom route to be inspirational? Like, can't we show our confidence and all these things? And yeah, I think, maybe women naturally, we are less outspoken. I personally don't feel that way, but like, I feel like we do probably hold back because we don't want people to think that we're nasty or we're too confident. So I don't know what the solution is. I think maybe it's just going to take more women saying what they really think and not really caring about what the consequence is, and then maybe seeing if that helps build the rivalries and the stories, and then the sport can just evolve. And it doesn't mean you have to be mean to each other. Like, we're not being mean to each other. We're just saying how we really feel, and we're athletes and we're competitive and we want to win. And why do we have to pretend otherwise?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think there is kind of this element of how can we start building those narratives? How can media outlets and publishers such as Tri247 work with women in sport to help them tell those stories and to create an environment where you do feel like you can kind of put yourself out there and be that outspoken voice that you want to be? Do you think there's anything that can be implemented or that can be done better?
Well, I think just starting at giving equal attention. I don't know, sometimes even you read like a race recap or of where men and women are both at, and it always starts with the men and then it's the women, like that's just kind of how it goes. Like, the men get the spotlight, or even you listen to other podcasts and they'll talk about a race and they're like, the winner of this race was Christian Blumenfeld. And it's like, okay, well, there was a women's race too. Like, let's talk about the women's race. So I think just being conscious of giving that equal attention is a good first step.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that tends to happen is that we let male results speak for themselves, whereas we expect female athletes to have this additional story behind them. So, you take a Lucy Charles Barkley. It's not enough that she's just a nasty athlete. We also need to talk about her dogs and her husband and all these other things. We just let Jan Frodeno be Jan Frodeno. Like, we talk about his results. We don't talk about his kids or his wife, who happens to be, one of the best triathletes of all time. Like, when he's interviewed at a press conference, they're not talking about those other things. And I think it kind of adds a superficiality sometimes to, to what we're doing. So the pursuit, where we have to be seen, we can't just be seen as athletes. To be taken seriously, or to be valued, we have to have this additional backstory. So I think that's something that I found to be pretty common in triathlon media. That just as often as we're talked about, sometimes our kids or our partners are talked about, which is always interesting because it's not the same with the men. Right. Yeah, it's really interesting that, like, we don't talk about the partners of male athletes, but we do with the women.
Like, as if we need them in order to be, which we do. We need the support, but it's like Sarah's like, I don't know, I could do it. Well, I just mean not to discount the supporting roles of people in our lives, but like, I'm the one doing everything. Like, I'm the one doing all the training.
Yeah, there's a lot of attention paid to the entourage of female athletes. Their support network. Entourage. But there's this assumption that these men get there to the top on their own because it's not covered.
Right. Like, for every strong male athlete, there is going to be a support crew behind just as much as there is for the women athletes. And I think that kind of feeds into a really interesting sort of idea, because I think coming into Kona, it was all about, we're putting a spotlight on the women's race, we're telling the stories. And I think there was definitely an element, from my perspective as someone watching from home, of, let's show these women, let's tell their stories and their backstories to inspire other women, which is awesome and that's great. But surely it shouldn't have to be a backstory that's inspiring. Like you say, the sport should speak to its own right. So I guess the question is, how do you balance that combination of spotlighting women's stories to inspire people, but also whose responsibility is that, and how can we be changing that narrative so it isn't focusing on all the auxiliary things it is saying, look how great this sport is?
I would say, for longer format stuff, it's great to flesh out and give people backstories. And that's something that we have to do for the men as well, because to be honest, I don't know that much about the lives of male athletes in the same way I do about female athletes. So I think that's something that with a full article, but then when you have a press conference and half the questions are more lifestyle based rather than performance based, I think that's when the moments really come up. Or, people are writing about, just going through the individual athletes, and you have a one sentence blurb about them. If half of that sentence has to do with other people in their lives, would you do that with a male athlete? I don't know. And to be honest, like, just to put myself, I know I play into it, because I do have these other things going on, but it's something that happens in like a subconscious level where you're like, I am proud of these other sides of myself, that I do love that, like, I have this in common with the amateur athletes, but I also recognize that when we continue to perpetuate these stories, our pursuit's not taken quite as seriously.
That is, like, I'm so glad you brought that up, Sarah, because obviously I've noticed, like, you go to a press conference when there's men and women there. First of all, the men take up 90 minutes, the women take up 20 minutes. And the men are all talking about, like, how they're going to fight it out on race day or how they fought it out previously in the year. And literally then when it gets to the women, it's like nothing about racing. So it's no wonder, like, our race doesn't get hyped at all, because we're talking about our dogs and our husbands back at home. Like, it's so true. It's so true.
And do you think it's kind of a two-way thing? Like, I think it's really important that we're, making sure that people are asking those questions that are actually about the racing and stuff. But do you think there's an element of, for the women sitting on that stage at the press conference, for example, trying not to have that kind of instilled fear of putting yourself out there and going, actually, do you know what? I'm in really good shape and I feel like I can do this. Or, I know that so-and-so is my main rival and I'm really excited to battle it out. Do you think it's a case of both ways?
We're definitely susceptible to the messaging. The message is that we can't talk about, our racing and be outwardly confident, that we're supposed to be humble and, kind of downplay that we really are very competitive.
I was pissed when Sarah caught me in Frankfurt. Like, I didn't like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And she was probably really happy.
Yeah. She's like, see ya.
But then after the race, it's like, you don't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess it's going to be kind of like a almost industry-wide thing that we need to change. It's how the fans are interacting with the sport. I mean, you only have to look on, one of the pro female athletes' Instagram posts and there'll be comments. And you think, would you have posted that on a male athlete's post? Probably not. So I think it's kind of everyone's responsibility, right, to try and just sort of change the tune a little bit and see if we can tease that out a bit more. So kind of thinking about more the commercial side of the sport now. So obviously with triathlon, I think the reason that we tend to think that it's all equal and we don't need to worry about equality and things like that is because the prize money generally is equal for men and women. But I'd be interested to know, in your opinion, because I think it was earlier in the year, Mirinda Carfrae was commentating and she was talking to Jack Kelly at a race, and they were talking about the time trial positions on the bikes and the bike tech and stuff. And there was kind of a conversation about the women didn't seem to have as much, high tech stuff or ability to test stuff out, like Magnus had his drop seat at Nice and things like that. And Mirinda kind of said that, in her opinion, female athletes weren't having the same access to sponsorship or deals as their male counterparts. If you don't mind talking about it, I'd be interested to know your opinion, either from your own experiences or just from what you've seen kind of around in the industry. Is there a disparity in the commercial landscape for women athletes? And do you think that kind of this idea of spotlighting women more through initiatives like Kona will have an impact on it?
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, I don't think there are a few female athletes who probably make more than their male counterparts with equal results, but by and large, we're making a lot less money. So I think that's the biggest difference, where, yeah, it's access to tech, it's access to product, it's money, it's exposure, all across the board, where if you had a male athlete with similar results, it would be a very different landscape for them in the industry. And yeah, how do you fix that? You get more women in those industries. The bike industry is super male dominated, so it's hard to get a lot of change unless you have change within the industries themselves, and people making decisions in marketing. But then, there's also the perception that a male athlete, side-by-side comparison, male, female athlete, a male athlete is more marketable. A female athlete with equal results also has to have a compelling backstory and be attractive. I straight up have had somebody in the industry tell me that they couldn't justify giving X athlete money because she was kind of boring and wasn't attractive enough. And this was in recent years, and this was a highly accomplished person that they were talking about. And that was slightly appalling to me, but it also made sense why some decisions are made.
Wow, that's insane, isn't it? And I don't think you'd have that for a male athlete, would you? It wouldn't matter. It would just
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think
men's value isn't based on what they look like, and
right.
We live in a world where a lot of women's value is still based on what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with everything Sarah said. Like, I've wondered this. If we took the top 20, we'll say PTO ranking, and we put in just sponsorship dollars alone, ranking for ranking, it would be incredibly skewed. And I don't know what other athletes are making, but I know what I'm making. So, and I can guess what my male counterpart would be making based on the travel they do, the cameraman they bring with them to every event they go to, all the cost of just like what they're doing. And it's kind of a vicious cycle, because obviously when you invest in yourself, then you hope that will pay off. But it's kind of like, okay, well, am I literally gonna have to just not make money for a few years and reinvest in myself in order to hope that it'll pay off someday, that sponsors will be like, oh yeah, cool, like her YouTube does get a few views and we can invest in her. So it's really tough. If women aren't given the financial opportunity that men are, then it's hard for us to progress. And to your point earlier about like tech and aerodynamics and all that stuff, like I'm extremely grateful for my sponsors, and I have great bike sponsors, but like no one's coming to me and being like, hey, do you want to go to the wind tunnel? Like I did some aero testing, I paid for it. It's extremely expensive. So if it's literally having to come out of the few sponsorship dollars that we're already getting to invest in tech and all that testing, like what are we going to choose between? Like a few $1,000s on aero testing, or like actually having some money in the bank? I don't know. That depends on the athlete. Or in some cases, literally paying your bills. Like it's tough, and it does need to change, because if the women's side is really going to grow and keep getting more competitive, then more of us need to be able to make an actual living, not just break even, not just maybe break even, or have a small net profit. Like we need to make a living, not just pay for triathlon. Yeah,
absolutely. And that kind of feeds back into that idea of storytelling as well, because like you say, a lot of the male athletes will have a dedicated cameraman who comes with them. And then so it's not only creating that environment where you feel that you can put yourself out there and be authentic and actually say what you think, but it's also facilitating you being able to get that message out there as well, right? So I can see where, it does become that vicious cycle.
Well, and I've even heard in a conversation with one of my sponsors, they were talking about a certain male athlete who is really invested in his social media, YouTube, photos. Someone's always with him, beautiful photos all the time. And all these sponsors want to work with him because they know that they're going to be in all these beautiful photos. And it's like, I get, and it's, I'll like have my husband come out with his iPhone and snap a few photos once in a while, or I'll see, you know, Sarah's got the selfie going or whatever. Like we just have to like make do with what we have. And yeah, occasionally we get these nice photos because we go to an event or, you know, like Kona, usually some nice photos come up. But yeah, when you hear stuff like that, like, oh, all these sponsors want to get on board with him because of all his beautiful photos. You're like, okay, well, how much does it cost to hire a photographer to follow me around every day? And the logistics of that, like, it's just.
We live in the day and age where we can't just be athletes, we're also supposed to be influencers. And I think when you start talking about what it means to be a female influencer versus a male influencer, that's a whole other discussion. And that's what we're treading in. Like the things, the social media landscape has changed a lot. And for some athletes, they know, they enjoy it. They know how to work the system. And it's been great. But I think overall it's harder for women to navigate that space than men.
Well, and then we were talking about like the attractiveness element of it. And like, here we are. Okay, I just went for a run. I'm going for a swim in an hour. I'm not going to put makeup on. I'm not going to straighten my hair. Like, what am I supposed to look like? It's just not practical to constantly look like I'm ready for like a cocktail party. Like, it's just not going to happen. And I believe we're all beautiful women and we can all look nice when we want to. But the reality is we're athletes. Like, we're not here to walk down a runway every day.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there is now that pressure as well. I mean, I see stuff on Instagram and then like someone will snap a picture of me running and I'm like, oh gosh, I just look completely awful compared to these super like almost airbrushed sort of images on Instagram. So I think it's definitely, it's a really tricky space to navigate. I'm conscious that I feel like we've kind of almost erred to the side of negativity here. So it'd be interesting to get a kind of a feel from you.
Just honesty.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Despite all these challenges, as a fan of the sport, it feels like it is a really exciting time for women's triathlon. I think, you know, this year, the PTO races, big events like Challenge Roth, and the sheer depth of the field going into Kona. I mean, trying to figure out who could be even in the top 10 was so difficult because there were so many genuine contenders. And I think I saw something today that 16 women went sub 9 at Kona this year, which is incredible. And it just shows that there is a lot of talent out there right now. There is this huge strength and breadth in the field. As an age grouper and a spectator sitting at home, it feels really inspiring. As professionals, everything we've discussed aside, how does it feel to be a woman in the sport right now with that context?
I think it feels really good. Like, yes, we just expressed all these frustrations that we're still working through and still need to change. But the reality is I feel like in the last couple of years, it's come a long way. And part of that, honestly, probably is to thank from the PTO giving us our own race and then Ironman giving us our own races on world championships. Like, that is giving us more of a platform and a stage to showcase how amazing we are as athletes. And I also think having more and more mothers in the sport, and like Sarah True is a wonderful mother, and we have Chelsea, who was our world champion, like that is really helping pave the way for women to live like a full life however they want to and still be an athlete. Because having the support to be a woman in whatever way, shape, or form that is for us, like that's really important. So for me personally, I feel really excited and empowered, and the equal prize purses and the amount of prize money and opportunities financially, like while sponsorship needs to catch up, like the prize money aspect is definitely looking very bright for the future. And honestly, I just wish I got in triathlon a little sooner. I wish I was a little younger because it just keeps looking better and better, honestly.
So. Yeah, the opportunities have never been better in terms of scope. So you have like from, you know, Super League onto like the new Ironman series, all these different distances. I mean, the Super League athletes are just, they're raking it in, some of them. Like they're making and the style of racing is super exciting. Like I'm a big fan. It's amazing for the sport. Yeah, I think overall, I feel very good about triathlon. I think in terms of equity, it does quite a good job. The industry side, like Skye said, that needs to change. I compare to, like, I have friends who are pro cyclists, and I compare it to cycling, and they are 40 years behind us. And not, we shouldn't feel good about ourselves because cycling's so far behind, but it is a good point of comparison where since the inception of ITU, we've had equal prize money for men and women. We've had equal distances. All these things, we've had equity kind of built into the sport so that it doesn't require huge systemic changes. So I do feel good from that standpoint about the sport, where we have some tweaking to do. We definitely have some improvement to make. But we don't have to blow up the whole foundation of the sport to make that happen.
I think that's a really good point, because I think that is kind of what tends to happen. We look at other sports, particularly cycling, and we go, well, we're so much better than them in triathlon, so everything's fine. But like you say, there are still, as much as we've kind of got the groundwork, there's definitely more that we can constantly be doing. And I think it is conversations like this where we sort of just interrogate that concept and work out what we can be doing better. That's really important. I can't not ask the question, the Ironman series next year, how do you think that's going to change the game? It seems quite exciting for a spectator, but I can imagine for athletes it must be a bit of a, what race do you go and do, and what do you choose?
I think there's a couple things at play. Obviously, there's the PTO, which will impact relatively quite a small pool of athletes, but those are also going to be some of the top athletes. So that may impact some of those Ironman series races. But I think for me, as an athlete who particularly excels at Ironman, like, the Ironman series looks very exciting to me. And I don't know how much it will change for some people who are already performing quite well, but it definitely just provides more opportunities for people who are trying to make it in the sport still and get some results, because there's still going to be all those races outside the Pro Series that people can go win or podium at. And I think it spreads the love a little bit more, and hopefully provides an opportunity for more people to make a living, or to at least be able to invest in themselves so that they can make it to that next level.
I'm always for more money in sport for professionals. Always a positive. I'm not going to say the other way. But I do think it's an interesting decision in terms of what would have the greatest impact on athletes. And, prize money in Ironman hasn't really gone up. It's gone down in a lot of events in recent years. I feel like it probably would have had a greater impact across more athletes if they had taken that bonus money and spread it out to races. I think that would have a bigger difference for people, because, like most sports, the rich get richer in cases like this, and that's not a bad thing because there's trickle down for everybody. But I do feel like it probably would have benefited different athletes if they had increased prize money.
I think it would be nice if we could see more athletes making a living. Like, because yes, there's that top tier that are making a very good living. Then there's a tier that are making a living, but it's not like an amazing living. They could maybe go find a different job and make more, be less tired, make more money. But anyway, to see more people who are making an actual living would be, I think, something cool. And yeah, like Sarah said, the Pro Series may not actually accomplish that, but yeah.
I guess it's a start, right?
Definitely. It's never a bad thing.
So final question before we wrap up. Obviously, Ironman have announced that they're sort of changing the age group qualification process for for the World Championships in Nice next year, so that women have more opportunities in the age group field to qualify. I'm just really interested to get your opinion on that. Is it a good thing, or is it kind of almost that going back to that pandering aspect of it? What do you think?
I've gotten some really positive feedback about it, where women who are saying that they don't have time to train for 2 Ironman races in a year, but they do have time to train for a top 5 in a 70.3 and 1 Ironman. And I don't think you can emphasize that enough. The amount of time that it takes for people with jobs and with life outside of sport to train for these things, and financial investment as well, like it's considerable. So if we get more competitive women at Nice as a result, I'm all for it. Yeah, positive. I also think it's really meaningful that they decided to cap it at top 5 because you will be getting competitive athletes. It's not going to be rolling down. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
No, I think it's really positive too. The more women we can encourage to be at these big events and experience that and just be part of the movement to get women all the spotlight and attention they deserve in sport, I think it's great. And we saw in Kona the finishing rate. Like, I don't think we need to worry about women not making it through. Like, we're tough, we're smart, we're gonna we're gonna get through that race. And yeah, I only see it as a positive as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what was really great about Kona was watching it at home. You know, they were actually interviewing age group athletes going into transition and things like that. And I think as much as we kind of, you know, want performances to speak for themselves, I think on that kind of grassroots age group level and bringing more women into sport in general, it is a case of see it to be it. And when you see women that you can kind of identify with, that's always going to help. So I think definitely I agree with both of you. The more opportunities, the better, for sure. It's been so great to chat with you both and hear your thoughts. I'm conscious that you're both extremely busy people. Skye, I know you've got to go and do your swim, so I won't take up any more of your time. But just before I let you go, what's next in the diary for this year? Are there any more races? Or are you having a well-earned rest after Kona?
I'm catching up on work right now. I wanted to race, but I can't get the time off of work, so no.
I'm going to go to Florida next weekend. And then I'm definitely done. I was like, okay, I can get through basically a week of training. It was like a week of recovery, a week of training, a week of kind of taper. So yeah, I'm going to go to Florida. Hopefully the weather is good there.
Yeah, hopefully a bit warmer.
Yeah, I will say the coldest I've ever been on race morning was at Ironman Florida 2 years ago. It was mental cold. Yeah, it was like howling wind and 40 degrees. It was miserable. So that's all I care about is as long as race morning's not like that, it'll be a great day.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. Sarah, I wish you all the best for catching up on all your work and getting all of that done. And Skye, good luck at Florida.
Yeah, good luck in Florida.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry to not see you there, Sarah.
Oh, I
saw you on the start list for a second. But
yeah, I was, and then I'm like, I can't swing it. Because like from East Coast, it's not bad travel. I'm like, but then they're like, no, you can't take more time off. You just took 2 weeks off. It's okay. It's okay. I'm like, I swear it's work.
Yeah, it is work. It's totally work.
Not according to them.
Well, good luck next weekend, Skye, and both of you know, all the best for the rest of the year. And I'm really excited to see where we're at in 2024 for women's triathlon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.